and welcome to the SABS webinar entitled SANS 10142 Part 1 2020, The Wiring of Premises Part 1, Low Voltage Installations. My name is Sadhvir Bassoon and I'm the executive for the Standards Division at the SABS. This morning we are joined by some very insightful guest speakers who will be presenting a few insights around SANS 10142 Part 1, both from an industrial perspective as well as from a regulatory perspective. The program this morning will be as follows. I will present briefly the role of the SABS in the development of relevant South African national standards. Second to follow will be Mr. Andre van der Els. He'll provide a presentation on why was the standard revised, what are the most important changes that have been made, and subsequent to that will be a presentation by Mr. Mark Palmer, who will present to us South Africa's legal requirements on the wiring code, and last but not least Mr. Pieter Loubser, who will provide us with South Africa's regulatory requirements on the wiring code. So to start off the session, I would like to call upon Mr. Andre van der Els, Mr. Mark Palmer if he's joined us, and Mr. Pieter Loubser just to do a round of introductions. Gentlemen, if you could put your cameras on and introduce yourself, and then we'll start with the program for this morning.
Good morning to all. My name is Andre van der Els. I am the current chairman or convener of the Wiring Code Working Group.
Morning, Andre, and welcome.
Thank you very much.
I would like to allow Pieter Loubser to introduce himself as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pieter Loubser from the Department of Employment and Labour. I'm the specialist for electrical engineering. Thank you.
Thank you, Pieter. I do see that we have Mark on the line, but I'm not too sure if he is connected. If not, we'll proceed with the program, and when he comes through, we'll allow him to introduce himself, and we'll continue with the program thereafter. Thank you, Pieter and Andre. I'll continue the presentation. So just a brief overview of the legislative mandate of the South African Bureau of Standards. The SABS was established in 1945. So to date, and especially in the month of September, we celebrate our 75th anniversary. So we've been in the world of standardization for in excess of 7 decades, playing a very important role in the development of national standards, and underpinned by that will be conformity assessment services provided by the institution as well. It's a legislative mandate as part of the Standards Act, and we fall within the technical infrastructure institutions. The other 3 institutions that form part of the structure include NRCS, who are the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, SANS, the South African National Accreditation System, and NAMISA, which is the National Metrology Institute of South Africa. These four organizations play a very important role in providing technical infrastructure standards as well as systems and processes in place to ensure that products, services that are rendered both by certification bodies, standards bodies, as well as laboratory services meet the respective norms and they are accredited to do so. The mandate of the SABS primarily is to develop, promote and maintain South African national standards, to promote quality with respect to commodities, products, services for domestic and export markets. And we also provide conformity assessment services, which include certification services, laboratory testing of products, inspections, as well as local content verification. So you're pretty well aware, or might be aware, that the use of standards in international and domestic trade and literally everyday life is very well a commonplace, and it's embedded within these socioeconomic systems, and without standards these systems cannot be conceivable. It plays a fundamental role in providing technical aspects to societal and environmental policies which contribute to sustainable development. This enables policymakers like government departments to establish their programs, their portfolio of services underpinned by standards that we publish. Standards also reflect the state of art and serve as a vehicle for dissemination of new technologies, innovative practices, certainly facilitates a wealth of importance around trade and supports industrialization objectives as well. It supports regulators because it provides the basis for technical regulations without causing unnecessary technical barriers to trade. So we certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel, and where regulators have the opportunity to reference a national standard as part of achieving a regulatory objective, this is where standards come into play. It also offers a range of tools for various types of conformity assessments. As pointed out, could be certification services, inspection services, verification and testing protocols that enhance confidence of products, systems, processes and personnel. And lastly but not least, it plays a very important role in assisting consumers to make informed buying decisions, ensuring that products and services are fit for purpose. From a global perspective, South Africa is a signatory to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So each government department has been plays a very important role as part of their program and portfolio of services in articulating a project plan that addresses these 17 sustainable development goals within their portfolio of services that they provide. So obviously each department will have an action plan, and the anticipated deadline 2030, this action plan will have various targets, monitoring and measuring and evaluation of these plans to achieve a national target contributing towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. At a national level, we also have the National Development Plan, and all 9 pillars of the National Development Plan align very easily in terms of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the solutions that we provide as national standards, which are aligned to UN SDGs, are also aligned to the National Development Plan. And lastly, we talk about industrialization and the national industrial priority sectors. Standards, as pointed out, play a very key role in supporting the national industrial priority sectors. A few key sectors which have been identified to support national industrialization includes mining and mineral beneficiation, industrial sectors, and there's quite a number of industrial sectors, tourism industry, high-tech sectors, ocean economy, and not forgetting agriculture and agro-processing. What underpins the national standards development is the national standardization strategy. So we are accountable for the development of a standardization strategy, ensuring that we have set up relevant technical committees, and we have a very diverse stakeholder group that participates in the development of national standards, and also our significant and proactive approach in participating in international and regional standardization forums. So what is a standard? It's basically knowledge and it represents an agreed way of addressing a current or potential issue. It could be an opportunity or it could be a problem. If you look at a more technical definition of a standard, definition by ISO and IEC Guide 2 of 2004, it's basically a document established by consensus and approved by a recognized body. And the recognized body from a South African perspective is the SABS. And these documents provide for common and repeated use. They may be rules, guidelines, characteristics of activities, or results aimed at achieving an optimum degree of order in a given context. So a number of items can be defined under standard. It could be requirements, specifications, it could be a guideline, it could be a code of practice, in this case, under the discussion for this morning's webinar. They also provide an essential element of infrastructure for industrialization. Key to this is that standards are for voluntary application, and we'll get to that later on in terms of the application and how they become by default mandatory requirements as part of a regulation or a policy requirement. SABS is a member of ISO and IEC, and we try as far as possible to be very proactive in participation in development of international standards and taking the state-of-the-art documents from ISO and IEC and bringing them back to South Africa and nationalizing these documents as South African national standards. We have a norm, and that's a guideline on how we develop South African national standards. And as signatories to the WTO TBT agreement, Annex 3, which is a code of practice for the preparation and application of standards, this is a legislative requirement for us to meet. So as pointed out, standards are not regulations. The documents that we publish are not mandatory requirements. However, regulatory authorities should, wherever possible, make use of the national standards in their regulatory work. And these authorities should endeavour to apply references, meaning referencing a particular standard, a particular clause, elements of the standard as methods that respect the voluntary nature of South African national standards. And in this case, in this particular scope of work or webinar that we're discussing, the standard 10142 part 1 is clearly referenced in at least 2 legislative obligations, which makes it a mandatory requirement. And my colleagues this morning will provide you with more information on that. So the development of national standards is clearly on the principles of openness, transparency, market relevance. I think market relevance is key to what we do. Got to make sure that the standard addresses a particular requirement in the marketplace, and it provides a solution to either an opportunity, as pointed out, or a problem in the marketplace. We've got to follow due process. It's a consensus approach of developing national standards. The process also has to be coherent, and is an extensive stakeholder engagement that is involved, which allows for a level playing field in our technical committees and the publication of our national standards. The stakeholder balance, we try as far as possible to maintain a very diverse representation of our technical committees. Quite a vast majority of our representatives participating in our technical committees are from industry, because majority of these are targeted towards industries. We have representatives from government, from labour, from academia, SMMEs to an extent, NGOs and consumer representative bodies as well. So different technical committees have different levels of representation depending on the scope of the technical committee that the work is currently ongoing. So the engine of standards development is the technical experts from the wide variety of stakeholder base that provide their voluntary time and effort and technical expertise in our working groups, technical committees and subcommittees to develop national standards. I mentioned earlier on around our representation or membership to international organizations. So this slide provides you with an overview of our participation both at a trilateral level, international, regional, and at a national level as well. At an international level, we are full members of the International Organization for Standardization. We are actually founding members of ISO, and we are members of the International Electrotechnical Commission. These two organizations in their own right are recognized by the WTO, including ITU, International Telecommunications Union, as the three globally recognized international standards bodies. ISO has a membership of 165 countries. They have a full complement of more than 22,000 ISO standards, and they have a range of 700 technical committees and subcommittees. On the other hand, IEC has 164 member countries, 134 technical committees and subcommittees, more than 9,000 IEC standards. At a regional level, we are members of ARSO, which is the African Organization for Standardization, members of the African Electrotechnical Commission, AFSEC, members at the sub-regional level, which is SADC-STAN, and it's important, and this word African Continental Free Trade Area is going to become even more prominent this year and the years to come, because the key focus around implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will be on harmonization of standards, and we play a very important role as SABS, together with the other member states and national standards bodies in the other countries of Africa, to develop harmonized standards. These harmonized standards will allow for the easy movement of goods and services, which will boost intra-Africa trade and support the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are also members of BRICS, which is the multilateral national standards bodies grouping, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the Pacific Area Standards Congress as well. On a national basis, we have a collection of more than 7,400 South African national standards, traversing literally all sectors, socioeconomic and environmental sectors and scopes of work. We publish on an average more than 250 standards annually. As pointed out, we have more than 300 committees, both technical committees and subcommittees, and we have to have a stakeholder expert base of more than 1,700 experts participating, contributing, debating, and articulating the technical content of our national standards. The process of development of national standards is a 6-step process. Just to go very quickly through the process, it includes a preliminary work item whereby a request for standards comes through to the technical committee. It could be a technical committee member or any member of the public could request for a particular standard. It's an evaluation process whereby the request and the proposal has to be evaluated for market relevance. The proposal is subsequently submitted to the technical committee, relevant technical committee, and if the technical committee approves and endorses of the approval based on the relevance, it's now submitted to the approvals committee for approval. Once the project has been approved, it then goes into the working group stages, whereby the technical experts start articulating the standard. Could be from ground zero, where you don't have any document, or it could be from a base document that has been submitted by the proposer, or an international standard, or a regional standard, or other national standards. It goes through a process of a working draft, which has been finalized and subsequently goes to the technical committee for consensus development process. Once consensus is achieved in the technical committee, it goes to public inquiry, and this is very important to understand that our national standards go out for a 60-day period of public inquiry, whereby every individual, every citizen has the opportunity to comment on the content of the national standard. Comments are taken into consideration, and finally, the standard is published as a South African national standard. Therefore, it's defined as an SANS and not SABS. It's not an SABS standard. We are responsible for governance of the process and follow due process, but the standard is a national standard. And the final stage is the publication and accessibility of the standard to the marketplace. I just want to highlight a few of the management system standards that we have published. These are just a handful of them, and the importance of these management system standards in alignment to addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You're probably very well aware of ISO 9000, ISO 14000. These are the two key fundamental standards that play a very important role in business quality management systems, as well as addressing environmental issues in the sense of environmental management system standard. So post the publication of these two documents, implementation by industry, as well as certification by certification bodies of these two international standards. There have been a number of other international standards that have been published as well that addresses other areas of possible opportunities and challenges in the marketplace. Specifically, Occupational Health and Safety Management System, which is the OHS 45001. It's a conversion or transition from migration from the Occupational Health and Safety Standard OHS 18000 to ISO 45000. The Energy Management System Standard, which is SANS 50001, and these play a key role in terms of energy efficiency, infrastructure development as part of the SDGs. Subsequent publications, asset management, risk management systems, food safety security management systems, anti-bribery management system. We just had a recent webinar on anti-bribery management systems, and these are key to the current ecosystem that we find ourselves in South Africa regarding extensive talks in the media around corruption and live cases of corruption in the country. Information security management systems. We talk about getting to the space of 4IR. This standard becomes a very important standard around security and addressing cybersecurity issues. Business continuity management system. It's a key standard that addresses and continues to address impacts in the marketplace like the COVID-19 pandemic, and how do we recover and become resilient as organizations and businesses. This provides the platform and the basis that could be used to address the various pandemics or risks that we are impacted by in the marketplace. There's also a standard management system standard on educational organizational management systems, and this addresses a management system standard specifically in the education sector. It's aligned to the quality management system principles, and we are currently engaging the tertiary institutions to adopt the standard as part of their framework of the quality management system. So lastly, we come to the discussions for today, which is SANS 10142. It's edition 3. It supersedes the edition 2. It's prepared by our national committee entitled TC67 Subcommittee 6, and the title of the committee is Electricity Distribution Systems and Components Installations. The aim of the standard is to ensure that people, animals, property are all protected from hazards that can arise from the operations of an electrical installation under both normal and fault conditions. And electrical installation has to provide protection against things like shock current, overcurrent, fault current, over voltage, under voltage, and electric arcs. This standard, or the provisions of the standard, apply only to the selection and application of electrical equipment, appliances and accessories which are part of the fixed electrical installation, and it certainly does not apply to the construction and safety of the equipment, appliances and accessories. Those aspects are dealt with other standards, and I'm sure my colleagues in the panel of presenters will talk a little bit more about that as well. I mentioned earlier on that the document is very important. It's a very comprehensive document. It's in excess of 300 pages, quite vast in comparison to the other standards that we publish, and it's highly technical as well. This standard is referenced in the Mine Health and Safety Act of 1996, as well as the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993, and these are legislative instruments that make the standard mandatory in its application. Colleagues, I'll stop there and thank you for your attention. I would like to now move over to our next speaker, who is Mr. Andre van der Elst. I'll just give you a brief background of Mr. Elst, and while he starts preparing his presentation. Mr. van der Elst graduated with a Bachelor of Engineering degree, Electrical Engineering, from the University of Potchefstroom, and also completed his government certificate of competency in electrical engineering. His career spans over 36 years in the employ of various companies of which the last 13 years has been as a partner at ELR Electrical Engineers. He has mainly been involved in consulting services related to electrical reticulation, distribution and building installations. He's served also at the SABS subcommittees and working groups related to high and low voltage switchgear, electricity distribution and wiring installations. The past 25 years he served as a member on the wiring code working group as well, the last 5 years as a chairman. So welcome, Andre. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bezoon. I just want to ask you and to make sure that I can be heard at this moment.
Andre, you're loud and clear, and your presentation is visual as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to all the attendees for your time to listen to us today. Many thanks, Dr. Bezoon, on those introductory comments. I need to respond or just comment on the 25 years involvement with the SANS 10142-1 working group. It sounds like a life sentence if you listen to the number, but I want to assure all of you that it is, and it was, and it is still an absolute honor and a very rewarding experience to be involved with a standard, and I think with many standards, and to give something back to the industry at this level. I'm going to share today a few slides to you to explain why we have edition 3 of the wiring code, and then also what are the most important changes. I just want to ensure that I can move on my slides, that it is not freezing. It's not cold, but the slides are not moving for some reason. I wonder why. Let's do this. Yes, it takes a bit of time. I have the first slide, and I hope and I trust you can see it and share it with me. The wiring code is a standard with a legal status. I think it was already mentioned. I need to give you the framework surrounding the working group as an introduction, and then we will move on with the content of this presentation. So the wiring code is maintained and updated and renewed by a working group of which I am currently the convener or chairperson. And we also report to the SABS committee and subcommittee responsible for wiring installations. And you already heard that industry is well represented on these committees. And then the SABS themselves, they manage the, let's say, the creation or the maintenance of the standard development process. They got an act that they have to adhere to, and there's a process behind it, and Dr. Bezoon has explained it comprehensively. The working group comprises of a very able and willing SABS secretariat and about 25 members who are specialists in various fields, and we meet on a regular basis about 4 or 5 times a year. It takes a full day, and the meetings are very, very interesting and sometimes very challenging as well. Just a concluding remark on the slide, the challenge, why I say it's a challenge. You must remember that during lockdown period in our country, regulations were issued, and we are all familiar of the various interpretations. Sometimes it's not easy to write regulation that is straightforward to the point. So the working group accepts, let's say, its input from stakeholders or from whoever corresponds with it, and then our task is, and that is where the consensus is, our task is to translate the consensus into safety regulation language, and then to translate it from there into, let's call it, plain, fair, understandable English. And believe me, it is easier said than done. So why do we have edition 3? Now look at the history, then you will know. There are so many versions of the wiring code to date, and they come over close to 100 years. It started in 1922 when the Factory Act was followed directly. Thereafter, there were codes. There were codes written by the Institute of Electrical Engineers and other organizations. It was the red code, the blue code, the green code, the grey code. It seems the full spectrum of color. Then edition 1.1 was issued in 2003 in a black folder, and since then we have the wiring code published and sold to the industry in a black cover. We had edition 1.1 to edition 1.8. It was quite a number of amendments, and there was a reason for it, because it was a time in the country's electrical history where compliance and standards were very heavily debated. Thereafter follows edition 2 in 2017, and as you all know, edition 3 this year. And edition 3 was a product of about 20 working group meetings over about 3.5 years, 3.5 years. The code is, and we want you to understand that the code must be a living document. It is not cast in concrete, because it has to follow developments in the IC world. It follows developments in the SANS, South African National Standards world. It also follows product developments from time to time. And it follows installation norms and practices, which also change over time. Then we have safety requirements that may change, or even safety or incidents that are reported, and we have to respond to it. So we have to learn and adapt. And then lastly, the industry as a whole correspond with the working group, and when they talk to us, we talk to them, and when we talk to them, it happens that we change the code from time to time, and then after a while we have to review the code if there are a few changes, because clause numbers will have to be amended, etc. So this is the reason why we have addition from time to time. So what has changed? And the input. It's quite easy to be the chairman, because you can delegate. You've got 25 members to delegate. So John Lamini has compiled a short list for me, and I'm going to present it in 2 slides. Firstly, I think a major change was a table on minimum size and maximum length of copper earth continuity conductors. Then we changed the reference of medical location requirements, and it's going to be parked in 10142-1-1, but it's also referenced in the wiring code, as well as the test report for electrical installations have changed. It has been simplified, I would suggest, and also secondary or private distribution test report has been added. Then also a test report for hazardous locations has been amended. A test report for medical locations are included, as well as a safety report for SABS protection, which is also a new document. Then table 4.1, very debated, all the products with the standards listed. We updated that. VCs were removed because we refer via the VC to a standards. Reference to combined gas and electrical installations are addressed. Third bullet, search and lightning protection, that we have reviewed as a whole, including a new Annex Q on risk assessment. We have introduced ARC fault detection devices. I just want to say they're not mandatory, they are there. They're there to inform the industry, so you can have a device in your house when you have somewhere downstream an arc. It will detect that arc through electromagnetic interference, and it will switch. Switchgear assemblies have been referring now to 61439. Previously, it referred to 60439. We introduce a neutral earth resistance test, and you can find that in Annex J. We modify the resistance of earth conductor requirements in line with the revision of the earth continuity conductor table that I refer to, and we introduce an annex on dedicated plug and socket outlets. So from these, let's call it most important changes, I'm going to highlight five of them due to limited time. But also, I think they were the most controversial or the most debated changes, and more or less 80% of our effort and time went into it. Firstly, the search and lightning protection section. So I need to point out that the requirement for search and lightning protection, both requirements remain informative. You can find it in clauses 676 and 677. But once you use it, the content of these annexures that the clauses refer to, the contents becomes normative. So it's no change, but it is an update in line with latest technology. Search protection devices are required where external lighting protection systems exists, or LPS. We made sure that that is addressed. NXQ is an added informative risk assessment annexure, and it was rewritten to make risk assessment easier to understand. You can also refer to the documents that it refers to. Then SANS 103.13 is included in the normative part of the code through Annex I. This has to do with the protection of structures, or the external protection of structures. It is not compulsory, but once you want to use lighting protection, you have to refer to SANS 103.13 and Annex I, obviously. So Annex I is a complete new section or annexure. It is modernized. It is reflecting the latest trends in this industry, and I think we have tried to simplify the application of source protection and lightning protection. Furthermore, installation details for source protection devices are contained in Annex I for source protection devices, obviously. Revised ratings for Class 2 SPDs are introduced. Recommended wiring methods, also that type 2 wiring method is preferred, it's just recommended. Details are given about wire sizes and placement of SPDs. It has changed. I think it's working a bit better than before. New figures dealing with equipotential bonding, voltage protection levels versus overvoltage categories, the coordination between lighting protection system, the SPDs, and the protective earth systems are covered, as well as risk assessment in Annex Q. And in the next slide, this risk assessment deals with the length of power line. It is a function of when it will trigger the risk, as well as specific risks that deals with residential and commercial type installations. First time that we distinguish between the two types of installations. Ground flash densities are updated, and as I said, there's also a safety report dealing with this. So source protection was one of the 5, let's say, key changes. Then the next one, and I trust the slide is available and you can see it, is earth continuity conductors. Now, I think Dr. Bazoon has illustrated the months required to develop a standard, change the standard. But here I have to point out that we received the input for this matter in 2014. And I want to give recognition for him, he's retired since, Mike Hendricks. It's 6 years later. It took us 6 years to really introduce that, not because we have not worked, but because it was a bit of a major trend difference in the code to align the code very strongly to the IEC 364 part of the wiring code. And the IEC world had a different way of dealing with earth continuity conductors. So it's a major big change. But as Mike pointed out in the old table 6.28, in the previous edition, which was a lookup table where you could look up the maximum length of an earth continuity conductor, that you would only generate about 2.5 times the protective device current rating if there is a fault or a fault. So 2.5, as you know, will not trip a circuit breaker instantaneously. It could take easily up to, let's call it, 30 seconds for a circuit breaker to trip, and 30 seconds could be lethal. So although it is, let's call it a primary protection, earth protection, we prefer the IEC way of having the tripping time reduced to an instantaneous philosophy of tripping. So there's a new table. The new table is also 6.28, but it's an A and a B part. And once again, we concentrate now because it becomes difficult. There are so many circuit breakers in the market. They all have different tripping curves. It could be curve 1, it could be curve 2, it could be curve B or C or D. So we had to read through all of this and push aside all the noise, and we decided to publish a table that will refer to what we call a general purpose protective device. It's a circuit breaker that will trip instantaneously on time 10 times the rated current. Now, it will cover for most cases. It will cover for, let's say, 80%, even more of the installations that you may be involved with. But we also give the formula, how it was derived. So if the products that you would work is not a 10 times IN rated device, then you could make the sums yourself. So what happens now is the same table will cause, under fault conditions, a 10 times rated current that is generated, and it will trip a general purpose circuit breaker within its instantaneous time. The effect of it is, I mean, it's nice, it's good from safety, that's what we want, but it has a cost implication as well. And in standards, safety is paramount, but safety and affordability and the knowledge base available must always be weighed between each other. It forms a consensus that one must achieve. So the sizes or the lengths of the earth continuity conductors have been halved, more or less, and that Mike Hendricks has also pointed out 18 July 2014 to us, and he was quite right. The next or the second item that was changed or amended is a COC test report. And because there is a continuous plea from the contracting industry for less onerous and simplified certification and test reports. So the COC, as you know, the certificate of compliance is contained in the electrical installation regulations, but the test report is in the wiring code, clause 8.7. You'll find it as a first report in that clause. So what have we done? What have we done with the COC? We reduced the document from a 4-pager to a 1-pager, I am told, in its printed format. Furthermore, we reduced the listed installed items, or the items that you must list, from 29 to 18, but we left open lines so you can add. It's just to make it simpler and to shorten the whole document. We reduced the inspection items from 16 to 4 essential tests inspections that must be done, and as we said, it economized the test section, and also we shortened the signature section to be a more practical, to have a more practical approach to the document. Then there's also the third change is a new test report on hazardous areas. I'm going to pick up the speed a bit due to time constraint. It is also in section or in clause 8.7 of the code. It is in section D of that clause. It is also simplified. It's aligned with the EIR. It's referencing the standards that we list here on the slide. And we made sure that there's a lot of documentation that must be added. I'm not going to work through the slide in detail, but it more or less explains what is in the test report. And I think what is important is the detail, but also there's a lot of supporting documentation that must be attached. So instead of having a very long and very difficult document to comply with, there will be a lot of supporting documents required. And it was heavily debated in our working group, I can assure you that. But I have it in writing that we have in this industry dealing with hazardous areas consensus that the test report is the way to go ahead. Lastly is the plug and socket outlets. Always very interesting because it forms a a big part of any contractor's life. Edition 3 of the code has added 12 variations of dedicated plugs and socket outlets to cater for the likes of emergency supplies and possible different voltages. So there are now SANS 164-2-1, which is partially dedicated, and -2, which is fully dedicated. It's a system that's aligned with the part 2 of the plug and socket standard. It looks like the obviously like the IEC standard with a pin, and the pin in the full dedicated system is then just rotated, and you will find a full definition of all the 12 variations in Annex R of the code. I made a summary. I think the summary, I'm just going to highlight a few points from the summary that we have changed or clarified the clauses dealing with socket outlets, specifically to allow for what happens when plugs are used side by side. For example, in a power skirting, we say it will be considered as a single outlet point. So you can have components building up, the one complying to part 1 and the other one complying to part 2 of 164 being next to each other. It's a compliance situation. And then also we said that for the dedicated, the last line of this page, we said for dedicated systems, we want the industry to use part 2, part 1, and part 2, part 2 more and more. It's a matter of we want to promote it, although you can still use part 4 of 164. The second page is just more detail. It shows what has changed, and I'm sure that the information will be available afterwards, so you can look it up. Annex R once again is the section dealing with the dedicated socket outlets. A few concluding words before I finish. I really want to give credit where credit is due for all this work. You heard it's a 350-page document. Firstly, I think the Secretariat of SAB is very supportive, very willing, very able. They assisted me a lot. The 25 working group members, you are all stars. You have given your passion for free, and yes, we had long debates, but also very rewarding when we reached consensus. And thirdly, I just want to mention my predecessors, as always, that we talk to the industry as a whole, but my predecessors had a long history of, in my 25 years of tenure, Jim Toms, Adolf Klaassen, Andre Du Plessis, and the late Isak Kruger as the chairpersons of the working group. What they left me was something that was easy to take forward and really to work with it, to give you the best possible edition of the wiring code. Lastly, I want to appeal to every user to embrace Edition 3, give it a good chance, engage with us at the working group should there be any issues, and many thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you for a very enlightening presentation. You certainly highlighted in quite detail the various changes that has taken place with the new edition being published as Edition 3. You certainly pointed out the 5 major groups, including surge and lightning protection, earth continuity conductors, the COC, the test reports, including the test report in hazardous areas, and last but not least, the plug and socket outlets. So I trust this is a wealth of information that you have provided to the professionals out there around the recent amendments to the standard, or revised clauses within the standard. Ladies and gentlemen, it is brought to my attention that Mr. Mark Palmer may be experiencing some challenges getting into and connecting to the webinar. I'm going to move ahead and continue on the program with Mr. Peter Loubser, and while I'm going to just provide a short resume of Mr. Loubser, I trust he'll be able to start the process of getting his presentation loaded. Thank you for that, Peter. So Peter basically started as a pupil inspector some years ago, 1989, with the Department of Employment and Labour. Through these years, he's been promoted where today is a specialist for electrical engineering. He obtained his national higher diploma in electrical engineering in 1991 at Peninsula Technology of University of Technology, and completed a government certificate of competency in electrical engineering in 1996. His main function at the department is the writing of regulations and directives for the electrical industry. Both the electrical machinery regulations and the electrical installation regulations were published during his time as the specialist for electrical engineering. Some of his other functions is to investigate complex incidents and complaints when they are requested to do so by provincial officers. So with that round of introduction, Peter Loubser, I'd like to hand over for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. I just want to confirm that my presentation is on the screen.
Sure, Peter, your presentation is on the screen. I would maybe advise if you could put the camera off, and maybe the audio will be much better, or the network will be much better while you're presenting.
Okay, thank you. As I've introduced myself, I'm from Department of Labour, and I want to start with the introduction, the content of my presentation. If I can just move it on. First, that I want to talk about is the incorporation of standards, the responsibility of persons, electrical installation regulations, the standard itself, and then the approved inspection authority that will follow with the registration. Let's start with section 44 that talks about the incorporation of standards. The minister may, by notice in the Gazette, incorporate in the regulations any health and safety standard that is relevant to the occupational health and safety. When you look at the short title of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it talks about the safety of machinery. And when you look at the definition of machinery, it will include your electrical installations. Now, before we may incorporate a standard into the regulations, we have to consult with the Advisory Council for Occupational Health and Safety in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, this standard has been incorporated into these regulations for some time. Now, what Section 44 also says, we will always apply the latest standard that has been published. So that means once a standard has been incorporated into the regulations and there are new additions or amendments, the latest standard will apply. Now, once a standard has been incorporated into the Act or in a regulation, that standard will become a regulation. It has got the same force as any regulation in this Act. I just want to touch on a definition of a standard. A standard means any provision occurring in a specific specification, compulsory specification, code of practice, or standard method as defined in Section 1 of the Standards Act of 1993. This Act has been replaced by the Standards Act of 2008, Act number 8 of 2008. Just before I start with the responsibility of manufacturers, I just want to look at regulation Section 9 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, Section 9 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act talks about the general duties of employers and self-employed persons, other than those who works for an employees. Now, when you look at this section of the Act, there are certain responsibilities to general duties of employers and self-employed persons. It says there that whatever they are doing, they must make sure that they don't put any person at risk. They must operate their business in such a manner that it will not affect the health and safety of any person. And this also applies to the self-employed person. Now, when you look at Section 10, it also talks about the designers, the manufacturers, the importers, the persons who sell products or supply articles for use at work, also have got an obligation to make sure that they comply. Now, the word that they are using here in the Act is as prescribed. When they use the word as prescribed, it means as prescribed by the regulations. So let's move to the next slide. Now, when you look at electrical installation regulations, it says there in regulation number 5 that all electrical installation work shall be done in accordance with the incorporated standard. Now, Regulation 5 deals with the design and construction of electrical installations. Now, in a standard, we also have got normative standards. And I'm just giving one example. We have got SANS 10142 Part 1-1 that deals with medical locations. So whoever install equipment that forms part of electrical installation must make sure that this equipment complies with the normative standards. There are standards for overcurrent protection devices, for cables. There are standards for sockets, as mentioned earlier on. So all the equipment are covered by standards. And this is where the manufacturer have to make sure that this equipment that will be used in electrical installation must comply with these standards. More important, the person who installs this equipment also have to verify that this equipment complies with the standards. So they must check for the marking on the equipment or request for the certificates from the supplier if they have got any doubts. If you look at the definition of a certificate of compliance, it also includes the test report. Now we have got a new test report that have to be completed for an electrical installation. But what we say in a standard,
I think there's a break in connection. Peter, can you hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, I think Peter is experiencing connectivity challenges. I think he just stopped his presentation. I trust he's going to reboot. I think we could just take a leg stretch for a couple of minutes, and we'll be back shortly. This gives enough time for Peter to come in back into his presentation. Thank you. Peter, are you back?
okay, thank you. Let me just put the presentation back here.
Okay, thank you.
Is it back?
I think it's coming. Oh, there you go. We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that loss of connection. Let's continue. I just want to move to talk about the last bullet again. What we are saying, we have got a new test report and we have got an old test report. We will run both of them parallel for a period of 12 months. That means you can use any one of the reports, especially those who have got a lot of spare test reports. You can still use them, but after 12-month period, you have to change it over to the new test report. So this 12 months have started in July, when the standard was published. I just want to also talk about a few important definitions. We first have got the definition for electrical installation. That is from the point of control to the point of consumption or a point of outlet. Then we have got a point of control. That is where your user of the electrical installation can switch off the entire electrical installation. And that is normally at a distribution board inside the property. And then we have got a point of consumption. Now, point of consumption is your point of outlet, or it can be a socket outlet, or the terminals on a machine. There's also a provision in this definition that says if you have got a complete unit for a specific purpose, you can stop with the electrical installation at the terminals for that unit. If I may use a steam generator as an example, on a steam generator you have got a control panel with sockets. Now all the equipment that is on that steam generator is there for a specific purpose for that steam generator. So what we do say is that your electrical installation will stop at the terminals that supply electricity to that control panel. And then we also have got the definition for installation work. When you look at the definition of installation work, it also includes the inspection and testing of an electrical installation. If you look at the registration of contractors, it says there that any person who do electrical installation work have to be registered with the Department of Employment and Labour. That means that even if you're only doing inspection and testing for the purpose of issuing a certificate of compliance, you have to be registered as an electrical contractor. In our electrical installation regulations, we also have got the approved inspection authority. This regulation that deals with inspection authorities talks about the approval by the chief inspector. Any person that wants to be approved must first be accredited by the accreditation authority. In our case, it will be SANS, the South African National Accreditation System, who will do the accreditation. At the moment, we only have got one approved inspection authority that operates nationally. We are also dealing with the registration of your registered persons at our head office. We have got 3 categories. The first one is the electrical tester for single phase installations, or electrical tester for single phase tester. And then we have got the installation electrician and a master installation electrician. All of them have to meet certain requirements before they can become a registered person. And the information brochure is available on our website. And then we have got also the registration of electrical contractors done at the provincial offices. So anyone who want to operate electrical contracting business can just go to the local provincial office and register with them. Now, this is the end of my presentation. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity that I can do this presentation. For example, yesterday we had a meeting, a council meeting, where we had a guest speaker from the African Union Development Agency, Mr. Norman Kosa. And one of the challenges that he has raised at the meeting was that occupational health and safety is not that well known by the public. When you talk about the Department of Employment and Labour in most of the African countries, the first thing that they think about is the social security. Social security is your unemployment insurance fund and the compensation fund. They don't think about occupational health and safety when you mention the department's name. And that is something that we want to address. And that is why we welcome these type of invitations, that we can also tell the public that we are not only there for UIF and CF, but also for the health and safety of persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lobsha, and thank you for a fantastic description of the regulatory process and providing the perspective of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the installation regulations, providing clarity on the inspectorate authority as well as the registration bodies as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's unfortunate that we could not get Mark Palmer to connect. We've certainly tried over the last hour. Unfortunately, network has failed us and technology has failed us this morning. But I'm sure he would have given us a fantastic view from a legislative perspective as well in terms of SANS 10142. Colleagues, I would like to go on to the next item on the agenda, which is a general discussion. But I think what we're going to do first is go through a few of the comments, some of which are questions as well, and we'll go through each one of them and respond accordingly. I did see a few responses from Andre as well on the question and answer line. So let me take them from top to bottom. I'll go with the first one, which is will the update be released soon, and how do I get hold of the updates? So basically, the edition 3 is readily available. It's been published probably a month or two ago, and it's accessible via the SABS web store. Just to provide an indication, the national standards are available, but they're not available for free. They're subject to copyright issues, and thereby you could easily access them from a web store. And our web store is accessible through the SABS website, sabs.co.za. Next question from Anonymous. If you are SABS subscriber, will you be able to download the standard at the current moment? So it depends. What do you mean by subscriber? If you participate in the technical committee, subcommittee or working group, and you put that as part of a subscriber or a definition, unfortunately, you don't have access to the published standard. You may have access to the working documents as part of a technical committee, a group of experts having access to working documents, but the final published standard is on our web store for access. If your company has a subscription of a collection of standards at the SABS, and this is basically a model of access of South African national standards. Then as part of your regular updates, depending on the frequency of how you get your updates, it will be part of the updated documents that you will get from the standards publication and copyrights department. Next question comment was, after publication of the revised edition, are there any workshops or educational platforms on the technical changes applied to the latest version? So this is one of an informal platform that we've introduced as well. So we're going to be hosting webinars, not necessarily on this particular topic, but on a lot of other standards that which we perceive to be of particular interest to the citizens out there, including, you know, all the categories. We talk about stakeholders involving public, private sector and consumers, to promote the understanding of standards and the uptake of standards as well. To move on to the next item, is the old test report template still accessible? I think, Andre, you commented on this. Andre, you want to come in to comment and respond around the test report template?
Trusting I can be heard and seen, yes. Template meaning it is copied somewhere on a hard piece of paper, yes. The template will be in your old wiring code and the new template will be in the new wiring code. So you can use a template. Better if you belongs to an industry organization such as, for example, the ECA. You can also purchase a very nice compiled document from them, having it all together all together and compiled. So it's obviously available from the old copy of SANS 10142 and also obviously in the new edition 3 if you just want to use your photostat machine for that.
Thank you, Andre. I'll move on to the next question or comment. Can the contractor still use the old COC template? And if so, for how long until it is fully scrapped from use? Andre, you want to come in with that? Or is this its comment relates to the previous question as well?
Yeah, I don't mind commenting. Peter Loubser actually covered that in his presentation, and he said that the two templates will run in parallel for 12 months since publication. I think one can assume publication was a few weeks ago, I would say.
Thank you, Andre. Peter, you want to have? Do you have any further comments to this question?
Okay, thank you. You can have a look in a standard, in a forward of the standard. They're talking about the test report, that the two can run parallel for a period of 12 months. So we will run from July this year. So next year, July 2021, everyone must use the new template that is in the new standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next question, in simplifying the COC test report, have we not compromised on the specific content or detail to be evaluated during testing and hence compromise on safety? Andre or Peter, anybody wants to come in on responding to that question?
I can respond if I have to. I would hate to say that we have compromised it. We have certainly debated it, and we have certainly reached consensus. And that brings me back to what I said. It's a compromise between safety and what is practical, and we try to improve things. So safety was or has not been compromised, in my view. If it has, it needs to be pointed out. But also remember that there is a price tag to safety. You can just go on and add safety at a tremendous cost. So you have to balance safety, let's call it very essential safety, and cost with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andre. I'm going to move on to the next comment. Is the available later via podcast? Yes, the entire webinar, the session will be on YouTube. And then we come to an interesting question. Can we issue a COC on a thatched roof house with external lightning mast, which have no previous documentation, and the mast do not comply with SANS 10313, what refers again to SANS 10225 for the condition of the mast and coverage? So this question certainly is quite technical, refers to other standards, not within the scope of this webinar. So I think it's quite a difficult one to respond to, and I think it's something that needs to probably go out of the forum and maybe respond. But I see, Andre, you're more than welcome to comment on this question.
Yes, I'm used to stick out my neck, so I'm also used to take punches. You must remember, with any new legislation, it is never implemented retrospectively. Legislation per se will always look forward. So since introduction, it will go forward. So if your installation was installed or erected, let's say in the years 1980, the code that was prevalent at that stage would be the regulation. That I say on the one hand. On the other hand, things have definitely improved. And if it is considered a more safe environment, if you would apply, let's call it a later version, or even 10313, I would say rather offer that as advice to your customer and give him the option to improve the safety. But if it comes to the hard paperwork and the legal part of it, what applied at the time of installation is what is applicable. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I trust the comments addresses the question at hand, and you're satisfied with the response. I have another from Anonymous. I see Andre responded around training, which is good, around workshops on the standard. Question for Peter directly. Andre, you want to come in?
Can I respond?
Yes.
You must rather or really contact your industry association if you are a member of any of those. I can assure you there are plenty of courses and industry associations to the likes of the ECA or the ECB or whoever. They cater for their members, and especially with edition 3, there are going to be a lot of presentations and forums where they will try to inform the members and the broad public. So just be aware on social media or contact your industry association.
Thank you, Andre. I'll move on, which appears to be a last comment or question, and this goes to, it's addressed to Peter. You'd like to ask Peter concerning issuing of COC. I have realized in newly built houses, the COC is issued without tests been done in the installation. This is because the City Council wants the COC when consumers are applying for electricity connection. According to the Health and Safety Act, is this allowed? Peter?
Thank you. Yeah, there's a specific regulations that deals with the connection of a new electrical installation to the network. It clearly states that the supplier may not issue or may not connect the electrical supply to an electrical installation unless there's a certificate of compliance that is completed. It goes further to say that the supplier may connect the supply to the electrical installation for the testing of that electrical installation. There are certain tests that you have to perform with the power on. For example, the earth fault loop impedance test. You need that connection from the supplier to be able to perform that test. So we do allow the council or the electrical supplier to switch on the power for the testing purposes. So after they have completed the test, then they will switch off the power again, unless they hand over the certificate of compliance to the supplier at the same time. But if the certificate of compliance is not available after the test, they will switch off. Once they have produced that certificate of compliance with the test report, then they can continue supplying that electrical installation. And I also want to inform the attendees, we have appointed 300 new inspectors over the past few months. Our plan is to appoint 500 inspectors before the end of this year. So we do have more people in the field. So if you know of any person or electrical supplier who connect electrical installations without a certificate of compliance, they can contact us at the provincial offices and lots of complaint, so that our inspectors can go out and do the inspection. And I just want to say, it doesn't matter what type of installation it is. We are looking at electrical installations at RDP houses. There are a lot of them in progress at the moment. We're also looking at townhouses or sectional title units, your formal houses, not formal houses, your commercial industry, and then also your industrial industry. It doesn't matter where it is, they have to comply with these regulations and the standard. And just to add on that, we also have got your electrical installations in hazardous locations, where we have incorporated SANS 10.10.8. That is also a normative standard in 10142 Part 1. So if there's anything that doesn't go according to the regulations, you are welcome to report it to the Department of Employment and Labour. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I see a last comment that has come through regarding the COC specimen document, or the template for that matter. My understanding is that it is part of the STANS 10142, or is there the template itself, specifically the COC specimen document, is it available elsewhere outside of the standard for access? Would you be able to respond to that, Peter or Andre?
Okay, I will respond to that. What we say from our side, they can make their own copies. They can generate their own copies on their computer, or they can buy it from a supplier. And I'm sure there will also be this the test report that will be available online. I know during the lockdown, the One Association has generated an online version. So they are available. So just contact these associations and they will make it available at a cost. or you can just generate your own certificate of compliance with the test report. And we have got various test reports now in a standard. There's one for your standard installation. There's one for your electrical installation at a common property of a complex. We also have got a certificate of the test report for medical locations and so on. So just go and buy your standard from SABS, that you can go through it and look out for the test reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, ladies and gentlemen, we in for good time in terms of concluding this session. We have addressed all the comments and discussion Q&As. As part of a concluding remark to the webinar, I would firstly like to thank Andre and Peter for making your valuable time available to the SABS for what is a very important webinar, as explained in terms of the content that you provided, very valuable information on SANS 10142, and provided it in a very simple fashion as well. Your contribution is really highly appreciated. I think we all understand and appreciate the importance of standards, as pointed out, towards socioeconomic and environmental development and addressing sustainability issues, and more importantly, how standards fit hand in glove with regulations as well. And it was clearly articulated by Peter, and the use of standards to address market availability, access of technical solutions that address opportunities in the market, as pointed out by Andre as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to close this webinar, but just before I close, it will be important just to point out that participation in our technical committees and subcommittees, there are opportunities for experts as part of companies, organizations, different stakeholder groups, including associations, do have the opportunity to participate in our technical committees as much as you would have the opportunity to contribute and comment to our national standards when they go on public inquiry. Please feel free to get onto the SABS website, and the SABS website has a wealth of information on standards, how to participate, the various technical committees. All 300 of them are listed. The scopes of the technical committees are listed as well and defined. So if you want to participate in the technical committee, you're welcome to do so. Determine which scope you would like to participate in as an expert, and there's requisite application forms that need to be completed as well. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite colleagues to participate in our technical committees, including our working groups as well. So with that, I would like to once again thank Andre and thank Peter for your valuable contribution to the webinar. And at this stage, I don't see any further comments, neither do I see any questions. I would like to close the webinar. Thank you once again to Andre and Peter.